Mana gains and summons galore. Overwhelm your opponents with the power of summoners and wardens. Hello guys, welcome to another ProGuides Teamfight Tactics video. Today we're going to be talking about ocean summoners. But first, I'd like to remind you to click on the link below and take a look at the updated ProGuides.com if you want to learn more about Teamfight Tactics. ProGuides will always have info on the newest patches, best builds, and strategies. There are all kinds of different resources from top players to help you be the best player you can be. So be sure to check out ProGuides.com using the link in the description. Now, let's get right back into the video. Let's start with the early game. You want to look for Thresh, Zyra, Malzahar, Vladimir, Syndra, since these will be a core part of your team in the late game, or important units to run to help you transition into the mid and late game later. Zyra is also a plant, meaning she's going to grow to victory, especially if you can get her 3-starred. She's insanely strong for a 1 cost. While you look for these units, you can usually take 2 routes in the early game. For the first route, you can play more passively and just focus on building up economy while trying to minimize your damage where you don't die too quickly, but get a spot in first or second pick for carousel. You typically take this route when your early game rolls are kinda weak and the first PvE rounds give you a fair amount of gold. It is a confirmed fact, dying loses you the game, so let's avoid that. To not take too much damage, getting generally strong units like Jax, Renekton, or Vladimir is a good start, since you'll usually be lower levels than aggressive people, and you'll also want units capable of taking down a few people, but not winning you the fight. While you do this, you'll want to build up as much gold as possible. Prioritize getting the best items and get ready to use your gold past Crumbz. Another route you can take is focusing on early leveling while building economy slowly. The advantages this gives you are finding your core units faster and preserving more health than others. However, you do lose the advantage of getting first and second pick depending on the lobby. If you manage to get last pick, you'll have to pray to the Lord and Savior RNG you get a good item, though most of the time it'll be a lot of chain vests. You also won't get as much economy as compared to not leveling. While you might be playing aggressively, you also want to try to hit the most gold possible. This usually happens when you sell weaker pairs to hit periods of gold. For example, selling 2 Orns to hit 20 gold can be a good idea. When you early level, try to focus on buying Nautilus and Azir as well. Aim to get 4 Oceans, 2 Wardens with Thresh, Vladimir, and Syndra, or 3 Summoners with Zyra and Malzahar as you start to reach the mid game. We'll go more in depth into itemization later in this video, but don't try to make items that won't fit into your team in the early game. Items like Thornmail, Deathblade, Infinity Edge might be tempting to make on your temporary carry or tank, but it's not worth it in the long run. Rageblade, Shojin, or Seraphs are good examples of items that can transfer onto your units later on. If you're looking to win streak early, but can't make any core items, then you can just put single components on your temporary units. After Crumbz, you'll usually start to hit level 6 around this time. You've reached the mid-game. You want to look for Annie, Yorick, and Brand. These are going to be a core part of your summoners and mages. Around this time, you'll want to go for 50 gold as well as hitting level 7 for ideal rolls. You'll want to look to transition out of your early game units as well, since synergies like Predators and Woodlands or units like Nasus and Renekton won't make it into your late game composition. We know sacrificing the crocodile isn't easy, but you have to make the call, Captain. You want to replace them with your core units even if they're 1-star, though this depends on the strength of a unit. A 2-star Ornn would typically be worse than a Brand 1-star, especially if you're running a Syndra Vladimir for 2 Ocean 3 mages. An important thing to note is when you want to roll. I've heard it's best when you're in a starship having animals talk to you. In all seriousness though, you'll want to roll under 2 circumstances. Firstly, when you're losing too much health. Around mid-game, you start taking a lot of damage. If your team isn't strong enough, you can aim to roll at level 6 to start upgrading your early game units and getting some of your late game units as well. While you roll down your gold, don't burn all of your economy right away, since you'll need it to level up later on. If you're ahead and upgraded a lot of things, or simply just not taking a lot of damage, then you can look to go for level 7 and start rolling there. This gives you the best chances of hitting 4 costs, making it easier to slot in your synergies, and you'll usually have a good amount of gold to roll. Once again, don't burn all of your gold though, since it's important to hit level 8 for your final composition. You want to start stacking your main carries around this point in the game as well, to not only minimize damage, but to get a better direction on what to do with your other items as well. If you have too many components, it can be confusing on which items to make. Once you've reached level 7 and gotten most of your units upgraded, around Raptors is when you want to start getting ready to level up to 8. If you don't have that much gold to level up and you're missing a lot of upgrades still, mostly focus on refining your team to the best of your abilities. However, if you rolled while keeping a steady economy around 30 to 40 gold, then you can aim for level 8. Once you've reached level 8, you finally hit the late game. This is the point in the game you want to start aiming for your final composition, which ideally looks like Thresh, Nautilus, Brand, Zyra, Yorick, Annie, Vladimir, and Syndra. This gives you 2 Wardens, 3 Summoners, 3 Infernals, 3 Mages, and 4 Ocean. This team is overall extremely well-rounded, providing strong frontline through Thresh, Nautilus, Yorick, and Annie's Tibbers, utilizing everyone's synergies together, and having powerful units like Brand, Zyra, and Syndra to deal damage. This is the most popular composition in the meta right now, with Janna as your 9th unit as well to proc Mystics. Even with the nerfs, Brand is still a highly contested unit who can carry the fight. In case you can't find a Brand though, because 4 others are going for this composition, here are some other compositions you can look to build depending on what you roll and what you're fighting against. The next team is Thresh, Nautilus, Zyra, Yorick, Annie, Malzahar, Azir, and Zed. This gives you 2 Oceans, 6 Summoners. This is a bit difficult to build, with it requiring you to hit Zed. It also requires you to build really aggressive items on your Malzahar, Azir, and Zyra to carry you. However, this team is extremely tanky, with Zed, Malzahar, Yorick, and Annie providing a ton of health value with their summons. For our next team, we have Thresh, Nautilus, Nami, Janna, Annie, Azir, Yorick, and then an Ocean unit, which can be Kiana if it's Ocean map, or Syndra and Vladimir. This gives you 4 Ocean, 3 Summoners, and 2 Mystics. If you find Ocean Lux, you can also run her and swap out Thresh or Nautilus with Malphite or Taric. This is more of a defensive team if you're against heavy magic damage teams like 6 Mages. In the late game, you mostly want to finish upgrading all of your units before leveling to 9, due to it just being insanely expensive. If you've gotten everything upgraded and still somehow have gold left over, you can try to push for 9 to get in a strong unit or finishing any synergies. If you aren't already running the Mystics version of the team, Nami is always great as a 9th unit in general, providing crowd control and bonus on hit damage for all of your allies. Surf's up, brah! Malphite and Taric are also great options in late game if you're fighting physical damage compositions as well. Malphite capable of providing a lot of crowd control, and Taric being just generally good at keeping all your summons and frontline alive. Or should we say, Taric is truly outrageous. Now that we've gotten over how to play at all points of the game, let's go over itemization, specifically talking about what general items you want to prioritize and look for. Yorick, Thresh, and Nautilus are the tanks of the team. If it's a wind map, you always want to prioritize getting an Iceborne Gauntlet on any one of them. Even after it's nerfed, it provides a solid debuff to help your team outpace the enemies. Thresh in particular can use Ionic Sparks to help get a bigger shield and get some magic resistance on as well, but only use it if you're fighting fast casters like Kindred, Kha'Zix, and Ezreal. In general, they work with items like Warmogs, Dragonclaw, and Zephyr. Frozen Heart and Redemption are somewhat decent, but tiers are usually better off on your hyper carries for a Seraph's or Spear of Shojin. Zyra is an extremely strong summoner for her cost, providing decent damage all around and having solid synergies. You don't usually want to stack her unless she's 3-starred, due to other summoners outscaling her in terms of damage. If you do manage to 3-star her, she works extremely well with Rageblade and Morrocrux. She also just works with mana items like Seraph's and Spear of Shojin. Malzahar is also similar to Zyra, but having a stronger synergy with Spear of Shojin in particular. Brand is always just a fantastic unit to put in with Ocean. He works particularly well with Morrocrux, Rageblade, and Spear of Shojin, similar to Malzahar. This usually means that you can stack Malzahar early on, then sell him and put the items on Brand later. You can also try Arcane Gauntlet if you're going Infinity Edge alongside it for what the kids call a vibe check. Other items that work great with Brand are Rabadon's Death Cap, Ionic Spark, Static Shiv, and Luden's Echo. He does great damage and pretty much works with anything. Vladimir, Syndra, and Annie are all not worth stacking in this team. Not particularly because they are weak, but they don't use items as well as others. Annie can be decent with Thief's Glove if you have an excess amount of Brawler's Glove. Vladimir can also take tank items if you manage to 3-star him. Azir, often overlooked due to him being a desert, can be an extremely powerful carry in a summoner group. He works generally well with attack speed, so Rageblade and Static Shiv are great options on him. Phantom Dancer is always a go-to if you're facing a lot of assassins. If you're having difficulty finding a late game carry, don't hesitate to use Azir. Now that we're done talking about items, let's get into positioning. Who exactly goes where? How do you position around elemental hexes? Well, with this team, you want to position accordingly to the enemy team and depending on what you roll. Particularly Malzahar, Zed, Zyra, Azir, Syndra, Lux, and Brand prefer to be in the very back. Yorick, Thresh, Nautilus, Taric, and Malphite are usually a direct frontline for your team. Finally, Vladimir, Master Yi, and Annie are a bit in between tanky and squishy, so they typically go towards the middle row. Vladimir can frontline if he's 3-starred, and the same goes for Master Yi if he's 2-starred. Let's go over elemental hexes, starting with infernal hexes. Typically, anyone that wants mana faster stands here, like Brand, Malzahar, and Zyra. Azir in particular works extremely well with this tile due to his damage being dependent on his attack speed. It's also ironic that most infernal champions don't use infernal hexes that well compared to other champions like Twitch and Azir. If the infernal hex is on the front line, it's usually not worth putting your hyper carry on there. Mountain hexes are always best for your hyper hyper carry in the back and main tanks in the front. If it's towards the back, putting your hyper carry on it can help prevent them from getting burst down. Also, as tempting as getting health value for your frontline can be, if the mountain hexes are placed in the back, that usually means you don't really use them as frontline. Ocean hex, you typically want to prioritize anyone with Spear of Shojin so they can get their ultimate faster. However, in general, anyone with a strong ultimate can use ocean hexes effectively, be it on the front line or back line. Finally, we have the wind hexes. These can be awkward when your main tank has an Iceborne Gauntlet and they're placed in the back row. If you sacrifice your positioning advantage to try to use Iceborne Gauntlet, it's usually better to just return to normal positioning. Speaking of that, the last thing to always keep in mind regarding elemental hexes, do not force yourself into them in the late game. Yes, Azir getting the Infernal Tile is useful, but if the enemy uses it to their advantage by placing a Kha'Zix on the opposite side, it's usually hurting you a lot more than it's benefiting. This also applies to Zephyr as well. If you notice your opponent using it, it's usually better having a weaker unit on the elemental tiles to play around it. Summoners have a particular advantage with having an overwhelming frontline, with units like Annie, Malzahar, Yorick, and Zed capable of providing extra meat shields. Because of this, try to spread out your back line. Make sure AoE like Malphite, Syndra, Nico, Nami, or even Glacial Berserkers can't directly hit everyone at once. You have a strong frontline, try to use it to your advantage. Let's talk about counters. What if you're not playing Ocean Summoners, but fighting against it? How can you retaliate to secure victory? Poison. This team focuses on overwhelming the opponent with summons and damage. However, Poison slows down their abilities a ton, especially when most units have extremely high mana pools. Even with mana items, it can be difficult for their team to fight back. The main way for an Ocean Summoner composition to counter this is spreading out their backline and having an insanely strong frontline. If they don't, Poison becomes an extremely devastating matchup. No wonder people find Poison toxic. Light Mystics. If you get your hands on enough 3 stars, it can be really difficult for Ocean Summoners to match your damage and sustain. Particularly if Vayne is 3-starred with Rageblade and Runaan's, she'll quickly start shredding their front line faster than they can kill yours. Mystics also makes it difficult for a Summoner's comp to fight back since they rely on a lot of magic damage as well. For items, Deathblade is one of the best counters to Summoners, particularly against Yorick and Malzahar. Every summon becomes bonus attack damage for your carry, which is particularly difficult to outmatch in damage if they don't burst your team fast enough. For units, Nami is the best counter unit against Ocean Summoners. While Nami is useful in Ocean Summoners herself, she's also one of the biggest counters to them. She's not only a Mystic, but she also provides a ton of AoE damage and crowd control to keep their team down, not to mention the bonus on hit damage she provides. A 2-star Nami can easily make it difficult for Ocean Summoners to win. Alright, that's it for our guide on Ocean Summoners. This composition uses the buffs to Thresh and Ocean to overwhelm opponents with pure density. We hope you guys enjoyed this video. Who's your favorite Ocean unit? What do you think is the strongest summoner? Comment down below. Also, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. We hope to see y'all next time.